Welcome everybody to today's episode of the podcast and video. I want to welcome today Indra Rinzler, and I'm really delighted to have his wealth of wisdom on the show today. Really looking forward to getting into this, Indra. Indra is a Vedic astrologer. He's a philosopher, he's a seeker, and he's an elder. And I think he's going to be able to offer us so much wisdom and insight into how he sees the world, and also all the wonderful things that he has learnt along his journey, which is always great to hear from somebody and give us a bit of a spark of what we might want to look into for ourselves. So Indra, I'd love to start first of all just with a bit about you, about how you got to be where you are now, how you started on this journey, and you know, why this is what you do with your life.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me today. Why indeed? Why not? What else are we going to do with our time? How I got started? I don't know. I moved to California in 1970, I was just thinking. And by 1971, I started going to, we had bookstores out here that had metaphysical books and astrology books, and I started reading them, and astrology stuck and spirituality stuck with me. I read Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda, the classic book that so many people have started with, and so I became a disciple and lived in a spiritual community of Yogananda devotees for 20 years before I started on my own search, I guess. I graduated and went out into the world, and I found the Enneagram of Personality at the time, and at that moment it was clear to me that there was a relationship between Enneagram and astrology. And I was lucky enough to meet a man who taught me a system of how to see Enneagram in astrological charts. And over many years after that, after meeting this man, before I actually started on my own practice of professional astrologer and coming up to 1,000 readings. I was a world traveler for 20 years and have worked with seekers in India and Rishikesh, where I used to hang a lot in the winter before COVID, and in Thailand, and taught in those two countries, and yeah, met more teachers in India, and it's just why not? It's
I love that.
Yeah. I think it's the if we trace back all of the stops and starts of our life, all the threads of our life, I think we'll find a common root or a common thread up to the sky. Either way, up, you know, higher, in or out, it's the same. So that thread is that thread is spirituality, that thread is depth, the thread is divinity, the thread is consciousness, the thread is something deeper than our own ideas and our own illusions and our own thinking and our own wisdom.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, when you first began reading those astrology books in the 70s, were you reading about Indian astrology, or were you reading like tropical Western astrology?
Yes, Dane Rudger and you know, that ilk, those were the people. And I kind of got to a place where I didn't know what else to do with it. I didn't know. They said, and then and here it is, you know, and then what do you do with it? And 1975. And so I kind of put it on the shelf for a
Mm.
while. I mean, I won't even say that I consciously put it on the shelf, but let's say it went on the shelf. And I've had this experience since, in a channeling experience, where they say, you say, I want to write a book, and they say, okay, drop the idea and now work on yourself. That's the quickest way to write the book.
Yeah.
And so the idea that by how can you learn about something if you drop it? It sounds counterintuitive, but there's a lot of counterintuitive in life.
Yeah.
And so what it is, you work on yourself. And so I had the experience recently. There is a particular chart, the Navamsha chart. I don't know if you've ever heard of it
I
or
have
not.
heard of it.
It's a
Yeah.
okay. So I've known about it for 20 or 25 years, and it never did much for me, because when I read about it, it didn't really make much sense, and it seemed um, I don't know, superfluous. That's probably my arrogance. It's just a word I picked. Maybe that's not what I thought. But anyways, so in the last 2 months, or about 2 months ago, I got involved with some astrology group for, one of the first times in my life, because I've always been kind of independent.
Mhm.
And then somebody talks to me about vibrational astrology and harmonics,
Yep.
which I didn't really know as a new thing. That the book hasn't been written, but it's well developed, and this harmonics is the same as the divisional charts. And all of a sudden, I read the same books that I've had for 25 years and realize the value of this Navamsha chart, and I can start sharing it right away because I've already done my homework on
Mhm.
astrology,
Mhm.
that I already understand the astrology and how I interpret a chart. And they give me this new chart. And I used to look at that chart as the spouse. That's the D9, the Devamsha is a spouse chart. And so I said, well, what is it? So then I come to realize that it's actually, that they call it it's the perfect spouse. And so who is the perfect spouse? The perfect spouse is yourself.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, it's the fruit of the tree, and that means that it's sort of the end of life chart.
Right.
And with those two sentences, all of a sudden I have a complete awareness of what this chart is, and started offering it in my readings. The first couple of people, I said, well, now look, I've only been with this thing for 3 days, and I may change my opinion, but let me tell you what I can see. And everybody says this is incredible. That what I found is that the 65-year-olds are already living the chart. The 50-year-olds are well aware of the aspects of where they're going, even if they're not actually living it. And even the 25s are sort of clued in to where they're ending up. And I don't have a problem that I didn't understand it for 25 years.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
Because that's only the mind that would say that. The fact
Yeah.
is that perhaps I wasn't ready for it.
Yep.
And in that, I don't find any fault or any limited thinking or any lack. It's just the way that my karma is, if that's the right word. The reality of it is, I'm a bit of a late bloomer.
Mm.
And I would tell the story that at the beginning of September, I sent off my first official 5,000 word major astrology article. And I said that I was so happy to do that. And it wasn't a problem that I waited until I was 75. And it's a great article, but I'm not attached to whether they print it or not. And yesterday, I got word that it's been edited, and they want to go forward with it in an astrology magazine
Great.
for astrologers.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel really good, but I don't feel any better, because if I felt better, then if they don't print it, then I don't feel good, and that's not really where I want to be. And so the fact is that I felt good that in 8 or 10 years of working on my writing, and 20 or 25 years, plus 25 years of working on astrology, I felt ready to make this expression, and that's okay. That I
Mm.
don't find that there's anything lacking in that.
Yeah, no, that's really true. I mean, I have been working in, what I do now as a healer, and then I've only been working with astrology for 1 year, but working as a healer for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years now. But yeah, I would sort of at first be thinking and saying to myself, and even saying to other people, I wish I had have done this. Like, I always knew that I was meant to do this, but I didn't do it. But now I'm more down the path of you as well, in terms of just going, look, this is when I was meant to do it. Then I had enough life experience. Who knows? That was the right time for me. It wasn't before I was ready. So everything happens for a reason. Absolutely. So then so did you get into the Indian Vedic astrology more when you were exposed to that culture?
Yes, but
Yeah.
I lived in I had a Indian guru, and the
Yeah.
community was full of Indian
Yep.
disciples, not Indian nationals, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean
Yep.
people devoted. And so we had Vedic. I had a Vedic astrologer. Vedic astrology over here. I don't. Again, the term came in the late '80s. And in the 90s, it started appearing, but there weren't really many books at that particular time. But I had a friend who was a Western astrologer, who became a Vedic astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
And before 99, when I got the Enneagram, I would listen, but I was interested, but not that interested. And I
Mm.
had a reading, but it wasn't anything that I felt inspired to do. But when I got the Enneagram that particular weekend and I saw the connection between them, then all of a sudden I got on fire for, I want to do this astrology, and I want to do the Enneagram, and I want to do them together. And I need to, and I want to, quote unquote, need to share the Mahadashas, the great periods, because I felt this to be a particular teaching that was very unique and really important for people to understand. And so at that moment, this became, while it had always been kind of a life goal, at that particular moment, it became um, more immediate.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a man who has perhaps the only system in the world that explains how Enneagram and astrology work together. And he was probably the most esoteric person I've ever met. And
Mm.
he taught me a lot besides those, but he gave me a lot of hints that still took me many, many years before I developed it into my own system. And that seems to be what my pattern is. I've had teachers in India, and I say, look, I've taken some of what you've said, and here, is it okay if I use it? And they say, I don't recognize it as my work because I make it my own. But the idea is that I have planets on the what I call the right side, the 7 through 12, and
Mm-hmm.
planets on those side are galactic gases, and so I can understand and feel connected to the larger concepts really easily.
Yep.
But putting words on those concepts was never easy.
Mm-hmm.
And with the teachers that I sat with in India, both Indian, but mostly Western, they gave me a languaging. They had the languaging, and so I would use phrase. I would get phrases, and then it would be like a tree root that it would just sort of expand out from there. That little tidbits of my personality as such. If I get a little tidbit, then I can grow on that, and then whole well, the whole reading, the 3 hour reading I do, kind of progress from all of these ideas, plus background still with Dane Rudger and the classic astrologers. I don't read too much modern, what you call modern astrology, because
Mm.
it's, I don't know, it just isn't so interesting to me. But I do read the classics, and I'm more interested in the energy of astrology, the energy involved. This is
Yes.
the energy age, Dwapara Yuga, the energy age. And I do believe I make a distinction between Kali Yuga, which was the lowest, densest age, and Dwapara Yuga. And in astrology, Kali Yuga is rigidity and fixed ways of thinking, and you're kind of stuck in your sign, and you're kind of stuck in your life. It's a little bit like the caste system in India, that you're kind of stuck at a level. Caste system is very Kali Yuga. And in Dwapara, it's about energy. And so there's freedom, there's self-expression, there's energy that the planets energize us, that it's an energy that we feel from them. It's not that there's anything wrong with the planet, but the dignity, the quality of energy and the sign that it's in creates a disease, an edginess, and so if a planet, so planets have high sides and planets have low sides, and on the low side, then we act out of our conditioned behavior. We act out from compulsions, and we compensate in our behavior for what we're lacking. And so it's a way to explain it in a way that nobody is wrong. There is no good or bad. It just is, and it gives people a way to overcome it, if that's the right word, to see beyond it. It being their difficult planets. And that's my approach. So where did that come from? I have no idea. It was given to me. It just appeared all of a sudden. I remember with my teacher in '99, I'd say something and he said, "Well, did you read that?" And I said, I think I did. He said, "I think you made it up." I said, "Maybe you're right." And whether I made it up or whether I read it, I don't really know.
Well, you didn't make it up anyway. You knew it. So just before because I definitely want to get into this Enneagram astrology thing, because that's absolutely fascinating. But before we do that, can you, because I think, probably a lot of people who will participate in this conversation may not even understand the main differences between what they think of as astrology, which is really modern tropical Western astrology, and the traditional Indian astrology that you're kind of being more drawn to. Can you just give us some key differences?
Sure. So what I like to say is the Western astrologers don't agree with the Western, and the Vedic don't agree with the Vedic, or the Indian astrologers. They don't agree with each other either. So the fact that they don't agree back and forth, I don't really consider that to be a problem. Basically, the planets are the same, though I don't use the outer planets. There are some, we don't use it traditionally in Indian astrology because they weren't known at the time that they were practicing it. And I don't use asteroids either. So we just use the inner planets, and we also use the north and south node of the moon, which are called Rahu and Ketu, and they're considered to be planets. The houses are basically the same. There would be some different definitions, but I don't think that's not really important. And the signs, the 12 signs are used, are the same. So the biggest difference is the sidereal chart versus the tropical chart. This is the way that we cast the chart. And I like to say, at one time, it's the most important concept, and it's the hardest to understand. So the way that I explain it is that tropical is based on the seasons. It's the relationship between the sun and the earth. And that is March 21st is Aries 1. Spring here in the northern hemisphere every year. And in sidereal means star. So we take into the stars behind the sun. So we're on the earth, and then we look to the sun, and then we look behind, and what we see is that the sky behind the sun is different every year, because it's on a 26,000 year cycle called the precession of the equinox. And the two systems were the same around 400 AD, but now they are 24 degrees difference. That's 1,500 years. 72 years equals 1 degree. And So that's the main difference.
Okay. And then there are some differences as well, though, because as I said before we started recording, so what I practice is Western sidereal astrology. So, and I think probably we don't put as much emphasis on the North and South nodes, although they're definitely used. But then there's also a whole lot of other concepts in what I understand in Indian Vedic astrology that come in that we also don't use in Western sidereal astrology. Is there any quick way to just highlight
Well,
what they are?
that is true. There's definitely more differences. I don't really bring them out because then it gets over people's heads and it isn't simplistic. But yes, there are aspects can be more important to some astrologers than others, and these concepts are not necessarily only tropical versus sidereal or tropical versus Indian. You have aspects. You have in Indian we have yogas, which are combinations of the ruler of this and the ruler of that, and they're, you know, and those, all of those things is not so much what I do. So I don't really make a distinction,
Right.
but there are there are people who look at, I mean, you know, I've explained recently in location astrology that we start talking that there are two, when we ask you when you were born, when and where were you born, we're fixing two qualities, that's time and place. And location astrology, we change place, but we keep the time the same. But there are astrologers that change time, and there are astrologers that I have read, I haven't studied it particularly, but they'll use a conception chart when you're conceived and first breath. And so people say, well, how do they know that? And I say, well, I don't know how they know that.
Yeah.
But the point is that they base their chart on that, on that particular time, and so each chart has its own frequency and vibration.
Yep.
And so it'll tell you something different. And so if you have a what we call a ruler or a yardstick, I know you don't use a meter stick, if you have that, so you're going to figure out a spatial distance with something. So that gives you an idea, you're measuring something by spatial distance. But if you have a scale, then you're also measuring, but you're measuring weight. And so you're measuring different things. So it's a different frequency, it's a different vibration. You're measuring, but you're measuring different things. And so with these different qualities, depending on when you cast the chart on time, or whether you use sidereal or tropical, or whether you use aspects, or whether you use you know, as I said, the dignities are the most important thing to me. They're like, you know, they're so far ahead of the race. They're home, you know, sitting in the hot tub by the time everybody else finishes the race, as far as what I consider to be the most important aspects of a chart. And so that is branding. You know, I don't know why that word came up. That's just how you want to do it. That is just, you know, whether you consider the North and South node to be really important or separate, that's really completely different. It's just as a musician might do acoustic, they might do rap, they might do rock and roll, they might do blues, you know, there's still music. It's still the same 12 notes, you know, the same notes, 8 notes, 12 notes.
And I really strongly believe it's it comes down to the intent of, you know, of the reading. And so it doesn't really matter what method you use, as you know, the intent can be the same. So yeah, totally, because as you said, we're talking about energy here, and you know, I totally agree that it doesn't really matter what system you're using.
And how many healing clients have you had that say to you that they heard the same thing, but from completely different healing modalities, you know, at different times in their life, they heard the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the Enneagram, and yes, especially this way that you've combined the two. So to start with, can you just explain briefly to people what the Enneagram is?
So Enneagram is a Greek term that means 9-sided figure. and it's a combination of three geometric shapes, which is the circle, which represents unity, an isosceles triangle, which has 3 points, which represents the law of three, which is triads, active, passive, and neutral principles, and a thing called a hexag, which I like to say is like a fancy paperclip that has 6 points. And so these three are combined. This was given to us by Gurdjieff, who was some of the younger people that's not so aware of who he was, but he's really was one of the fathers of the New Age movement, if it's a movement, New Age reality, starting to teach in Russia in 1916. He was a totally mysterious man. He gave us the Enneagram figure. He never told us where he got it or if he made it up. And it was his student's student who was a psychologist, who put personalities at these points. And so the Enneagram of Personality are 9, that there are 9 personality types, and it's an archetypal system. I believe it's the archetypal system. It is the system to unwind the 2,000 to 5,000 years of the Judeo-Christian tradition, conditioning, crappy behavior that we pass down from one generation to the next. It's a way of uncovering that, because as a psychological tool, they only look at behavior and there's no end game. But as a spiritual tool, it is unique because it has no bias, and it gives us the core triggers and help us to get back to the moment.
So why, or when do you think that it's useful for people to do an Enneagram reading, I suppose is what you'd call it?
Well, there's a simple test. There are tests, simple tests, word tests. In fact, in your part of the world, I have a friend down there, and there's a group down there. Maybe you're aware of it. But anyways, you can take a simple test online, and for most people, they can figure out the number and they can read about themselves. And then they can start learning. I would say at any age. I mean, there are people that don't like to do it for young people. You can do it or not do it. I don't want to go into that particular debate, but the fact is that it helps you to understand yourself. It helps you to understand your relationships. I was married to my first wife for 25 years, and at the end we got the Enneagram, and while we had loved each other, we had never understood each other, and then we understood each other with the Enneagram, that we can understand how we tend to think that everybody's the same as ours, but everybody comes from their own separate vibrational story. And when we can see that, it's a theme that we've been talking about, that you grow, even though you may not grow specifically, you may not be studying psychology or working on yourself, but if you study the Enneagram, you start to learn yourself better, and then you're more compassionate and more understanding towards other people.
Yeah, I've actually only recently done it, just this year for the first time. So I did find it fascinating. I'm a 9, just in case you've got any advice for me, Indra.
That's interesting, because I was feeling 6, and I sometimes feel people in there where they're at. And so if you're a tad stressed, 9 goes to 6, and that's what I'm feeling. I didn't feel it was a 9. I felt it was a 6.
Okay, interesting. No, I'm a 9 with a 1 and an 8. Is the wings? Is that what they call them?
Yeah, the wings. Yeah, you look thin, so they're mostly the ones, the one wing, and they get territorial. When they get triggered, they get territorial, particularly around the kitchen. That all of a sudden you have to cut certain ways, and you have to wash dishes certain ways, and don't use the wrong pot. And so I have a 9 wife who can be very one-ish, and I always check, because I don't want to create disharmony.
Yeah. Well, a 9 definitely doesn't want disharmony.
No, I don't want to create disharmony.
So, all right. So let's. This is not a.
And by the way, I'm a 7. By the way,
you're a 7. Yeah. So I was just thinking in my head. Then I'd really love to read more about the other signs. Is there numbers? Is there a good book that you'd recommend?
So the book I recommend is called The Wisdom of the Enneagram.
Mm-hmm.
Hudson and Riso, Riso, I guess.
Okay.
And it's the classic book. It's spiritually based, and it's easy to read, and it's really depth and has a lot of unusual stuff. I say any book will be helpful. You can read tons of stuff for free. If you just Google
Yeah.
Enneagram, you'll be inundated. But the book is The Wisdom of the Enneagram. That's the one I suggest. It's about 20 or 25 years old.
Okay, great. All right, so tell us about the combination of the Enneagram and astrology, because that really does fascinate me.
So the systems that exist that people talk about is mainly a one-to-one. In other words, Saturn is a 1, Mars is a 2. I should say the Enneagram has as there are 9 points, and they're given numbers 1 through 9, and there's no hierarchy. And they also have names, but of course people don't agree on the names, and so we use the numbers. And so most of the systems are 1-to-1. But the fact is that we're much more complex than that. And my teacher was given Vedic. He was empathic at birth, and could hear, and he was a hermit, and he could hear everything, and he knew, and he was given Vedic astrology at 15, and he was totally intuitive, and so he was able to go deep with it. And the fact is that we're complicated people, and so there are quite a few markers for each point. And markers are astrological signs that work for to express the Enneagram points. And so a couple of markers for 9s would be is they tend to have really good planets. They tend to have a lot of positive dignities. And the dignities is the strength of the planet, depending on what sign that it's in. So why should they have positive? Is because the 9s know that you come with nothing and you leave with nothing. So why work up a sweat in between? They don't have a lot of challenges, and so they tend to have very good dignities in their chart.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's one aspect. So another one that I've been given that's really surprising is they don't have a planet in the 4th house and the 10th house. So why the 4th house and the 10th house? Why is that empty for 9s? So the 4th house to me is about heart. It's your grounding in your own being. And ultimately, when you have a planet there, then you can open your heart. And 10 is about career and mundane, but it's your action in the world. And so what's the action in the world is love. And so 9s have a lot of energy around heart and love. If you say heart and love, you'd say, well, that would be a 9. So why are those planets empty? Why are those houses empty? Is because their heart and their love is a story. It's not real. It's the story of heart and love. It's not actually heart and love.
Yeah.
How does that feel? Do you understand?
I do. Yeah.
So they have an empty 4th and 10th house, which was a total surprise to me, because you'd think that they would be good at that. But the emptiness is that empty houses, you make up a story because you feel that lack.
Yes. Yeah. The energy goes there.
Okay. And so another one would be around Mars. So the anger is repressed, and I find that both 9s and 1s in Enneagram world can have the when I say these things, this might be in 30 or 40% of the 9 charts. It's not 100%, but these are markers, and so they do appear. There are people who I will never. There'll be 9s and I'll never recognize it in the chart, and then there's other people I can recognize right away. And so another would be with the Mars is in the 12th house. Well, why is that? It's because it's a ethereal house. It's a transition house, and so their anger is not earthly planed, and so they hold back their anger. They're not able to feel their anger, and then Mars is the planet of doing, and so they're not able to do because it's in the 12th house. So that's another marker. One more would be K2, the south node in the 1st house. So why K2 or the south node in the 1st house? Because there's a detachment in K2. that K2 has a detached energy. And so in the first house, that's people who are detached from themselves. That's one definition of a 9.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have that, and I don't have, my Mars is in my 7th house.
Okay, well, it's not a universal, and
No,
it's not
I
about
get
being
that
a
you're saying that.
universal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I shouldn't keep talking about myself because this is not about me. I'm going to have to book a reading with you now. So
You wouldn't be the first podcaster to do that.
yeah, I'm sure. All right. So so basically really useful for people to understand themselves better and how they, react and relate in the world.
So let me can I sum it up? Let
Yeah,
me sum it up a
please.
little bit for you. So the idea is that so that if I tell you as a 9 that you hold back your anger, and you say, okay, I you might say you seem old enough that you would say, yes, I do. But if you're younger, you may say, well, no, I don't. And, coming out explosive is holding it back. That's compulsive behavior. I call that the high side of the low side. So, but then if I show it in your chart and I say, now you've got Mars in the 12th house, and it's really hard for you to express your anger because you're disengaged from it because it's ethereal, then you might go, so I'm getting a perspective that it's not only that I do it and it's part of the 9 story, which I'm not quite understanding because it's too painful to go into it, but I can see that my Mars is difficult for me to access because it's in the 12th house, and yada, that just different aspects of it. You get to see it in a different way. It's a different languaging, and this can open people up to hear things that they can't hear, that they couldn't hear before. I won't say can't hear, but they couldn't hear before.
Yeah.
And so, with healing, you sometimes have to say things twice. You sometimes have to try it differently. As a customer, you go to different healers because you say, well, that can't be right, and then you go to the next one and they say the same thing.
Yeah.
This is how we are. I had a 9 client recently who I suggested in location astrology that she moved to the West Coast in America now from the Midwest. And she wrote me and she said that her mother and her sister had already told her that before, but that she hadn't listened. And now she heard it. Because I explained it in a way that I could show her relocation chart. I could show it in a way that she could it really blew her open. It changed her life right there in for her to allow herself to feel her own needs, to express herself, to do for herself, to be engaged in her own life. This is 9 story, and she was able to hear it, and that's okay. There are things we need to hear 3 times. There's things we need to hear 10 times. There's things we need to hear 20 times. Again, that's okay. That's just part of it. That's not there's not a lack in us. There's not maybe I could say then it must be a deep issue. If you have to hear it 20 times, then it might be a deep issue. But other than that, I cannot find any good or bad related to that. It's just the way things are.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. And then the Wheel of Totality, I have not heard of that. I don't know anything about it, so I'd love for you to explain that.
Okay, so the Wheel of Totality is a modality that was given to me, and I don't think anyone else in the world uses it.
Okay.
And it was given to me. It was given to me by spirit. And I love when people say, I don't think I've heard of it, because nobody's heard of it. And so the idea here is that I believe that there is awareness that it's about the empty houses in astrology. So you may like this. So what it is that in a reading, we talk about the houses that have planets. We don't really talk much about the empty houses. And if we do talk about them, then we may talk about the ruler of that house and yada, yada. And I like to say, if you're going to have an operation, do you want the doctor on Skype, or do you want him there with you? And so I want him there. And I consider the ruler halfway across the solar system is not much energy in that house. And so each house has awareness. But because we don't have a planet there, we have a blind spot around that awareness. And so I use the empty houses. Now, I'm not using the outer planets, and I'm not using any asteroids. I'm only using the inner planets and the north and south node of the moon. I don't use the outer planets because they move slower and they're more generational. And I think it's noisy for what I'm trying to do in this particular modality. And so we overlay your sidereal natal chart. I happen to use Yukteswar's Ayanamsha, or adjustment, rather than Lahiri, and that can change a little bit sometimes for people. But anyways, I overlay it onto the chart, and where I see houses, that's where you have an awareness of the energy in that particular house. And I've given awarenesses, and maybe I should go through those, the 1 through 12, the awareness of each house. So the awareness of the first house, and so people say, is it astrology? So this is way before astrology. This is astrology is very mundane. This is a very high frequency. This is way before astrology is ever invented or even thought about. And so the first house is really about discovering who you really are. And people that have a planet there have an innate ability to discover who they really are. And people that don't have a planet there have trouble identifying themselves in order to discover who they really are. Who they really are is essence. It's an onion you have to peel. So the second house is about duality, that the duality that black and white thinking, and that the people that have a planet there can think in gray. They can see options. The people that don't have a planet there tend to think in limited terms, black and white thinking, and they can be judgmental and critical from that. They have a limitation in their thinking. So the third house is about mind. And so people that don't have a planet there have trouble seeing through the mind. They don't have the monkey mind because they don't have any planets there. But without that planetary energy, they can kind of get stuck in their thoughts, even though their mind is not racing. The fact is that, and they're not living out of their mind, but the fact is that the ideas come up and they can have trouble seeing through that. So the fourth house is about heart. As I said before, the fourth house is heart. And so the people that don't have a planet there have trouble grounding in themselves. And so they have trouble opening their heart and feeling, they may feel compassion for all animals that have ever lived and that are living. And they may have compassion for people, but they probably don't have compassion for themselves. And the fifth house is about God. And so God starts as giving our power away to a man on the throne. It eventually becomes the awareness that there is a cosmic intelligence. And with that cosmic intelligence, then you can trust and accept what is. If you don't have a planet there, then you have trouble trusting and accepting what is. The sixth house I call practice. And practice is staring at a candle or doing yoga and meditation. It eventually becomes in totality. So I forgot to mention that the graphic for this is totality at the center, and then the concentric circles out of the awarenesses, and then the activities in that house, a concentric circle further out. And so practice, the sixth house on the inside by totality, is living 24/7 in undisturbed consciousness. And so practice is about learning to, as you learn to stretch your arm up in yoga, you need to learn to stretch your being, stretch your mind in the physical plane world. That the practice is to take it into the physical plane world. The seventh house is seeing through conditioning. And so people that don't have a planet there have trouble seeing through conditioning. And so while they can be really strong and very opinionated, they're still holding on to childhood concepts from family and society. And I had a lady yesterday, she really listened to all of what her friends were telling her, 26-year-old, listening to what her friends told her, because she doesn't have a planet there and she can't see through the conditioning and the ideas. The eighth house is no separation. And so people that don't have a planet there don't understand that there is no separation, that we are all connected. And the ninth house is separation. is emptiness. And emptiness is about, everybody can understand emptiness in nature, but the people that don't have a planet there, by the time they get back to the car, they're thinking about groceries and what are they going to eat for dinner. The people who have a planet there can stay with emptiness for much longer. Emptiness is the same as silence, but it's not no noise, it's no story. So it's an emptiness within themselves. And the point being that if you have a planet there, then you have an ability and an understanding of emptiness. You have an ability to that. It doesn't mean that you at birth are empty. It means that you have an understanding there, and so you can go deeper with it. If you don't have a planet, then it's a foreign concept, and we don't really work on these until the late 40s or 50s. And why is that? Is because in 20s and 30s, we're working on ego. We're not really working on our deficiencies. So the 10th house is about love, and love becomes an attitude. It doesn't need an object, and it's universal, and it's just a way that you open to life. And the 11th house is realization. Realization is the surrender. The realization is the opposite from the 5th house. It's the eternal trusting, is the knowing that there is a place to get to beyond beyond duality, but beyond my understanding, that there is a goal, that there is a place to be, there is a way to be that's beyond my understanding. That's the realization. The people that don't have a planet there, they don't understand that they tend to think in terms of worldly goals, but more than worldly goals. They can be very spiritual, but they still have trouble finishing off because they don't quite understand that there is a place beyond me where that if they let go of themselves, then they'll have everything. And the 12th house is transcendence and impermanence, that everything changes. And people that don't have a planet there have trouble with changes. They have trouble accepting the mundane changes. They have trouble accepting the universal changes. People that have a planet there, they flow with change as well. They see that as impermanence, as part of life, that things happen, that things change, and it's okay.
Wonderful. So so in your readings, then you're just kind of bringing all those three things together for people. Is that, and it's kind of just one thing then? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I would say it is. The full life, what I call the full life reading, I take at least 3 hours. It can take longer depending on the complications of people and how many questions they have and their understanding. Some people have more complicated situations. Some people have done a lot of work, and so it's not as complex. So I would, in the 3 hours, I would spend about an hour and a half usually on Enneagram. And then an hour or so on the astrology, including the Navamsha. And then I would spend the last half hour with the Wheel of Totality, and then summing up. And then I do a tarot card reading at the end. I like to say that the tarot, well, it's a short thing. It's a short thing, but I read the reading, and I like to say that I talk for 3 or 4 hours, and then the tarot card book takes it down to 8 words. It takes what I said down to 8 words, and this happens most of the time. Maybe it's 12 words on some people, but the affirmation at the end for that particular card is exquisite, and it really just backs up everything I've already said usually.
Yeah, amazing. And so is that the only service that you offer? Do you want to tell us about other things that you do as well?
Sure. So I've added location astrology. So the location astrology is I call that the power of place. And the idea being that you can make place, you can change place in your chart, that where you were born, it might have been Aries rising, but if you go 2,000 miles east or west, it's not Aries rising anymore. And so you can cast what we call a relocation chart for different places. And so you become these different charts. And so if you've got you say your Mars, I think I heard you say Mars in the 7th house. And so if you move to Perth, all of a sudden that that Mars is going to go into the 8th house.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, instead of working on relationships, you're working on transformation.
Mm.
And okay, Perth could be 2 houses away, so I'm, don't
Yeah.
quote me on that.
Yeah.
But the idea being that that we can change, and that change has a lot of ability for us, because it's like when we travel and we get new perspectives, and so those are real. We get new perspectives because while we take our own personality with us and our own grievances and challenges, the fact is that we have all of a sudden, we're not seeing, my 7th house sun. It's nice to get that out of into a different house. And had a client who had a stellium 3 houses in the 11th house, and I thought when she moved to I forget where when she moved to a place that had it in the 1st house, I thought that was really good for her, because in the 11th house it included her son, and I think she needed to really get that into out of 11th house, which is really good. It's like ending. It's like the orgasm without any of the workup. And now the orgasm is great, but whatever the experience is, it's nice to have that pre and that understanding. And so as we move around, we get these planets, they get a different perspective. And so I also do astrocartography, which is you take a flat map of the world, and the lines are drawn on it. The lines of all the planets are at the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th house. It's a 0 degrees, 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th. They are considered to be those are the cardinal houses, the cardinal signs.
Yep.
And so these particular points of 0 degrees are said to be the most direct energy. Mm-hmm. And so we can then see graphically where you move to a place. You can see in a place what lines you have near you. When you live in a place where there aren't a lot of lines, it seems to be not a very good place for people. I mean, if you were, my age and you wanted to live on top of a mountain, a place with no lines probably would be good, because you'd have no energy. But other, younger ladies that I have worked with as clients, they say there's not much energy there because there's no lines. And so we can look with the astrocartography, we can actually find a place, like I had a client who was in her sun Mahadasha, and I tried to suggest to her that she should move to a sun line. I think she was also a 9, and that coming into her sun line and her sun, her 6 years of sun Mahadasha, a great period, I thought would really good for her. And I could see where that is on the astrocartography shows me exactly where that is. And so we can have you can give me a place, and I can tell you what the energy of that place is, based on relocation and based on astrocartography. But with the astrocartography, I can figure out a vibration for you, and I can find a place that has that. A vibration being a collection of planets or a line, particularly, that would be very relevant to things that you're trying to work on.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I've definitely got to do that. Okay, yep. And is there anything else that you want to tell people about that you can help them with?
Oh, okay. So I can answer the hard questions. I can make sense out of things that don't make sense out of anything. I tend to see people at crossroads. A lot of people come when they're about to go into a new planetary period. These periods are they're long, and so they average in 45 years. You might only have had 4 of them. You might be entering your 5th or entering your 4th. And so those are particularly important. And so I tend to find people come to me, they find me somehow, they like the way I look, or my energy aura. It may not even be it's not physical necessarily.
Yeah.
But it's at the shows. If you do the shows, they come up to you. Why do they come up to you? They just feel it. The people that read my board at the show, they're not the ones that sit down. The people that sit down are the ones that they just walk up and sit down.
Yeah.
I need a reading from you. They don't know what it is that I do.
Yeah.
So I can help. I can work with people that are young. I can work with people that are old. I do what I call finishing off, is that they just want to know if there's any blocks left, and particularly with the Wheel of Totality, I can go really deep into things that they may not be aware of, or they may be. It's not that I tell people things that they're not aware of, and quite often they're aware of it, but they haven't put it together. It's like puzzle. I put puzzle parts together. They've got the part, but they haven't put the puzzle together. And I can put the puzzle together in a way that people don't really understand before that. And so I call it a transcendental experience, because the people are not the same at the end, even if they never work with any of the material and never hear the talk again, the session again. It's all recorded and made available to them. If they never hear it again, they can't go back in the box. Well, they can go back in the box if they totally ignore it all, but that takes a lot of effort. So yeah, I work with people of all ages and in all situations all over the world. I've had I have people from your part of the world, and Tasmania recently, and New Zealand recently, and Australia, and South Africa, and plus even local to here in California and USA. So
great.
I'm not sure what else I can say. It's you contact me, and it's a sliding scale, and it's not for everybody. It can be intense. You can adjust the intensity based on how much you want to reveal and how vulnerable you want to be. But the idea is that it's people say it's a very warm space that I provide. There's no I say it's essence to essence. It's not about there's no judgment. There's no right or wrong. It's essence to essence. We're talking about personality, but we're not talking from our personality or to our personality. We're talking from our higher selves. It's a overview. I use this example for people to understand, especially if they have a lot of challenges in their chart. So when they get a little discouraged, I say to them, well, okay, so I don't know if this is true, but let's just imagine that right before we begin our life, we sit down with God at a table, and he says, okay, you're going to have another life coming up. What should we do? And we say, well, I don't know. And he says, well, I've been noticing a theme of yada yada, so maybe we'll yada yada this time. And you say, okay. And then we get down here, and so why have I got all these challenges? And so one way I can, there's two things that come to mind how I can make sense of it. Is one is because it's not so much that it's our karma, but it's things that we have to learn. And then the other side of the challenge is why do we have these challenges? Is because once we learn them, then we can teach them. Because everything that we teach is something that we're learning. The reason we're teaching it is because we need to learn it. It's not because we know it. It's because we're learning it. And that's why the newer people in like maybe any organization, but a spiritual organization, it's the new people that show the new people around, because they've got all the enthusiasm, and they're fresh and they're interested in. And the older people are they're Om Swaha, whatever, it's a wonderful place, and you'll find that out for yourself. They just don't share on the same level. And so the idea is that what we're teaching is what we're here to learn, and it's only the mind that wants to make sense out of it, to see limitations.
Yeah, thank you. So the best place for people to find you, is that your website, Indra?
Yeah, the website would be the best place, indrarinzler.com, and my email is indrarinzler@gmail.com, and it's all one word, and I suppose that I can spell it if you want, and maybe I'm sure it's on something. So
I'll put it in the notes.
RINZLER. So that's the best way. And I'd love to connect with anybody that open to exploring.
Exploring and doing the work. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much.